what I will call this meeting is like hosting you in our living space in our house, and to have a nice discussion on the future of the energy efficiency mortgage market. We really believe that this is a discussion among friends, among professional experts that would like to exchange views, and we would like also to invite all of you to have an active participation, because today, as usual, we have a very relevant presentation, and I'm sure that you have a lot of questions for our speakers, and we are very honored to have such a high-level speaker with us this afternoon. As you know, my job description is to be a lobbyist, and there were two messages that I wanted to give this afternoon with this Bauhaus event. I wanted to tell to my members, to my banks, that the world is changing very rapidly, and that the European regulation is adapting to a completely new landscape, and we have to think how to address the issue and the requirements that the European regulation is putting to our banks. And any minute lost is a minute that we have missed an opportunity to provide an input to the European economy. We really need to put together the views of the different market stakeholders and trying to find a strategic view how to align interests and make sure that our business line will be ready to a transition economy. This was important when, and I said more or less the same thing on the 7th of February when I introduced the last Bauhaus. But in between, I think the world has changed. Allow me to use the words used by Vice President Timmermans last week on the 8th of March, when he said that the course of the European history changed on the 24th of February. What is happening not far away from our houses is something that is shocking all of us. And we have to be very rational, and we have to think on how we can put together all our energy to give a strong response to what is happening. And I think energy efficiency is the core, is the strategic heart of Europe now. How to improve energy efficiency in the housing stock of the European Union is not anymore a religious behavior or with something that we believe that is important to do because it's important for our kids. It's an emergency at the continent level, and we need to reduce dependency on gas and other sources of energy. We need to reduce the energy dependency for every single building, and we need to convince consumer that is the right decision, is the right approach to have in the coming months. Today, I will let Richard introduce the speakers, but I'm very happy. We have, as usual, we try to always to keep a balance between geographical scope, different kind of market stakeholders, and also gender balance. And we are very happy to have today with us Miguel and Beatriz, because they are helping me in giving the sign that the market is taking initiative. The market is moving quicker and is trying to give a very strong response to the European authorities. On the other side, we have Thibault and Diana today that will help us to understand what is changing and how quickly the market should react. I would like to thank all of you really for being with us. I would like also to let you know that the next Bauhaus will take place on the 22nd of April. We will continue to discuss about EPBD, taxonomy, and we will show you that the market is taking more and more initiative, and I will give you more overview on what is happening in other countries. We will go to Germany, we will go to Italy, and to see and discover more market initiative. But I mean, I will keep this for the 22nd of April. With this, I would like to give the floor to Richard, and thank you, Richard, for guiding us in this journey towards Europe. And thank you all for being with us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luca, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, well, I'm not sure if we managed to achieve a geographical balance that Luca spoke about. We have, I think, 2 speakers from Brussels and two speakers from Spain, but we've certainly achieved a nice balance between the public and the private sector. I think in so many of these things that we're trying to do, Commission throws down the challenges and then we have to pick them up. We have to, as an industry, find a way to respond to them. And that's kind of the theme for today. I'm delighted to welcome today two different speakers from Brussels. Diana Barglazan from DG Energy is going to be talking about the taxonomy. We hear a lot about it. We're going to be talking more about the technical screening criteria, how it fits into the agenda, and perhaps most importantly, maybe we'll get a little bit of a clue about where the taxonomy is going from here. Thibault Roy is, well, frankly, is backed by popular demand. After last month, Thibault, I think, provoked more questions than we've ever had from a speaker before. And quite frankly, we simply didn't have the time to even scratch the surface of the questions that you came up. So I made a note of all the questions and I asked Thibault to come back, and I'm going to go through all those questions for you. On the subject of questions, they are always very, very welcome. Please put them in the chat room. Please send them to me directly. We'll try to get through as many of them as we can. And our private sector speakers today, well, we include Miguel Garcia de Eulate from Caja Rural de Navarra. Miguel has just successfully raised 500 million euros to fund energy efficiency loans with the very first green Spanish covered bond. It's a very successful transaction in difficult times. And I think I'm going to ask Miguel to share with us some of the lessons from that bond and from the overall approach that they're taking to green lending to their customers. And we're going to start in Spain as well. And I should say, for any Spaniards, I've got to apologise. I'm absolutely massacring the pronunciations in your beautiful language, but sorry about that. One of the problems that everything we're trying to do, one of the problems we keep facing, we keep recognising, is a paucity of data. Quite simply, we have no idea what the energy efficiency of most of the homes in Europe is, which is a pretty fundamental problem to a lot of what we're trying to do. It's a problem that Sociedad Tasacion has been trying to solve. So I would like to start by asking their CEO, Juan Fernández-Aceytuno, to explain the approach and the progress that they've made in trying to address this. Juan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Richard. And I'll share. Can you see the full screen? Thanks a lot. So again, thanks Luca and Richard and the EMF and all the people attending the call, and really appreciate and we are really thrilled about this possibility. And a few words, and as Luca said, and our praise and our support with Ukrainian people and all that situation, which is terrible, and this we all hope that this knows and finish as soon as possible. In the meantime, our life has to go on, and what we are trying to share here with all of you as CEO of the company is the solution that the Spanish financial institutions have decided to take as a standard for the market. I hear some noise in the. I don't know if some microphones are open. I would appreciate if everyone can put the microphone on mute. Thanks a lot.
Could everyone please mute if you're not speaking? Thank you.
So basically the appraisal companies in Spain, we have 40 years of experience, appraisal management companies. We in fact celebrate the 40th anniversary this year. Basically, we are a line of defense in front of the systemic risk, which is the evaluation. Again, the noise is terrible. I don't know if you can hear noise back.
We can hear you, but it's not perfect. If everybody could please mute so we don't have the feedback, that would be really helpful.
Is it possible to mute everyone from the?
I think If we can mute everyone who isn't already muted themselves. That sounds better. Shall we try?
That's much better. Now the problem that I have is I cannot move the presentation forward because someone has requested the right to write on the presentation. Moises Arroyo has, so I cannot. I cannot move the slides forward.
Sorry, so somebody has requested.
Yeah, Moises Arroyo has requested to write on the presentation and is blocking me to go ahead.
Okay, could you please, if that's you, could you please undo that? I don't know how to do that myself, I'll admit.
Yeah, we are trying to fix it. I mean, I don't know.
Okay.
I think Lucina is on it. Maybe Juan, in
Well,
the meantime, maybe if we can maybe try to, the slides will follow. We are trying to fix the problem. Maybe we can try to have a discussion.
I should say that all of these slides are going to be available afterwards. So perhaps one of you could carry on without the slides. We'll catch up afterwards.
Yeah, it would be the same if we cannot see live the presentation, but now.
Sorry about this, ladies and gentlemen. Lucine, would it be possible to share your screen, your version, and then we could do it?
Now now I got the power again. Sorry.
You don't have the power.
I got the power. Sorry about that. What I was saying is that the appraisal companies were born in Spain 4 years ago for the only reason to protect the investor, the covered bond investors, as in a replication of what the German industry did long before. The appraisal valuation is a systemic risk. It affects the LTV of the loans, it affects the P&L of the lenders, it affects the capital of the financial institution. So the ECB requires that for this systemic risk, 3 lines of defense should be put in place: the valuer, the appraisal management company, and the Bank of Spain in the case of Spain. In Europe, you know that every country has its own system of appraisal, but that's where we are coming from. The vision from Sociedad, Tasacion, and on the ESG demand really goes back 3 years ago in a conversation that Luca and I had in Spain as a result of an event organized by the European Mortgage Federation in Madrid. And Luca told us a number of things about ESG and how we should prepare for it. And he told me, Juan, even if you don't know how to incorporate the ESG parameters in the values of the collaterals, at least you need to start to measure the ESG factors. And that was capital and was a great advice from Luca that we did appreciate. We listened to that, and we started 3 years ago collecting data. Why? Because we understood from that comment from Luca that if you cannot measure anything, you cannot value. So the first step in adding add value or issue evaluation is to measure it. You need to measure surface and flat. You are able. There's a calling user 6 with some noise. Sorry about that. So before issuing an appraisal, you need to be able to measure the surface. So the same happens in ESG. Before incorporating the sustainability in the collateral valuation, in the long-term perception of the investors, you need to measure it. And this is what we started to do 3 years ago in 3 different levels. In residential properties, with basically the EPC and the exposure to material risks. The SMEs measure the sustainability ratings of the companies, and large enterprise. We are going to talk about the residential properties today. The regulatory background starts with the European Commission and the non-financial reporting guidelines supplement on climate-related information. Also in the European Commission, the ECB issued guidelines on climate-related and environmental risk. There were supervisory expectations about that. The Bank of Spain replicated those expectations for the country of Spain. And EBA also issued a final report on draft regulatory and technical standards, which gave us the path to follow on this side. No? You know that supervisory expectations are aggruppated in governance, in risk management, and information disclosure. A capital and fundamental question that the EBA issue is, where will banks get the data from? Because in sustainability, there's a common, and it's recognized that there is lack of data. So in this document, the EBA acknowledged the possibility of usage of models in the estimation of the data that is scarce or is missing. In terms of portfolio climate risk, there is clearly 3 steps as well identified in all the guidelines. First is the identification, is the property, how the house, the construction is affecting the climate, and how the climate or the physical location of the property is affecting the property itself. In qualification, you can use database and models, and in exposure, you have to take into account the portfolio and the environmental and the context of the solution. So in identification, how can the property may affect the climate in transition risks? Basically, is the emissions of CO2 and the consumption in kilowatts. But there are also material risks that there are expectations from DCB in terms of river flood, seismic flood, fire, sea flood of the certification that also need to address. This is the concept of our work. We have a cadastral identification, in total 26 million of units identified uniquely in a Spanish market. So there is a database of EPCs available in the market. There is a public registries on the local communities. So from that, we could download up to 4 million of properties that were on those registries. But there are 26 million of properties. So how come a lender may get information from the whole 26 million of properties available in the market for 2 reasons? One, they may be in the portfolio, in the balance sheet of the lender. 2, they need to understand as well what is the impact on what is the context and how is the benchmark. We use the databases of appraisals with information like construction year, the regulation code in which the company was built, the construction quality, the property height, the climate location, the orientation, etc. And we built a model that could estimate the EPC. And also we did the back testing on that. This is how the EPCs, real EPCs that have been issued in the Spanish market, in total 4.3 million, are distributed through the country. But not all of them, as we have 17 regional communities, not all of them are collecting the same information. So the first problem was to homogenize all this information, to make one single database with all the information from the public registries, but in a homogeneous way. So you can get the same information from all these different files. The second was to build a number of models based on the dispersion, based on the information available. If you have one building and you have a referential cadastral reference that is in the portfolio of the lender A, but that reference has no certificate associated to it, by looking in the building, you may infer which is the letter of the certificate of that particular asset. So we built 3 different models based on the dispersion and the volume of the certificates available, and with that we could improve the quality of our model. Our model was based on a number of variables and then a scoring process based on the distribution of the real EPCs available in the market. The model is real. The model has been shared with the Bank of Spain and with the auditor that has been selected by all the financial institutions that participated in the joint effort. So basically, the problem was there are expectations from the supervisors, ECB and Bank of Spain. What's the solution? The lenders, the Spanish lenders, joined together in a common bid, and they asked the industry, how can you help us? And they ask this information, they send this request to consultants, to appraisal management companies, you name it. So what we did is to present this solution where if the certificate exists, the EPC exists, we will provide the letter and all the information in emissions and consumption of the certificate. But if the certificate doesn't exist, I will run the model that estimates the letter for you. And as EBA says, you can use a model if the model is able to be, or is possible to be scrutinized and audited by an independent party. This is what all the financial institutions have done in Spain. In total, what I'm talking about today is not a future, it's a reality. 47 financial institutions in Spain have gone through this process. They sent to us their cadastral references. We came back to them with the output of the real certificate or the model plus the physical risk, as I will mention before. This is a test, a backtesting exercise in Barcelona. This is an example. 83% of the guesses were within the right limits. No? What we also provide is a platform where all the information for the lender is visually managed. Of course, we send to the lenders, to the 47 lenders, the databases, but they are also can see it in physical way, segmented by the variables that they want. For example, this is a portfolio of 450,000 units that we share the outcome by letter of the EPC and by percentage of the letters we found in the registries are classified or by the model. No? We can go down to the province. For example, in Andalusia, in this portfolio, there were 36,000, and you can see the split by province. And Barcelona, in Catalonia, there were 139,000, and you can see the split in Barcelona, Girona, Lleida, and Tarragona. But also, you can go one in the platform, you can go as slow scale as you want. For example, you can see here the province of Barcelona with all the data segmented for that portfolio. But you can also go to Barcelona city, and this is all the portfolio of this lender in Barcelona as how it's rated and how it's classified. And you can go even deeper at the even reaching the catastrophe plot by plot and house by house, understanding how by neighbor, by sección censal or by zip code, your portfolio is affected. You also can compare this with the benchmark of the properties. No? This is you can also split in the platform by consumption on kilowatts per hour in year, or tons of CO2. For example, this portfolio has about 2 million of emissions of tons of CO2. And the consumption is about 9 million of megawatts hour per year. This information was a dream, just a dream a few years ago. And now that the lender is able to estimate the emissions and the consumptions at this level of detail for all the portfolio and being able to put it in a visual platform, we believe that is a big step for the industrial, for the financial industry in Spain. In total, there are 40, these are the 26 million of cadastral reference. And just very quick in the last 5 minutes I have in my half an hour about the physical risk that were also part of the expectations. And these are the physical risks we are able to identify: river flood, seismic fire, sea flood, desertification. But then we also incorporated urban regulation risk, building regulation risk, corrective effects, etc. No? So we improve the quality of the information. What we did, nothing very special, perhaps was clever, but basically the information was there. The maps were there in the different ministries and regional communities where they had the information. What we did was to correlate that information with the catastrophe. That's the key. When you are able to manage the information and use the information for decision-making process. And that's the beauty of the platform, that in the same platform, you can see the EPCs, real or the model, and the physical risk associated to the cadastral unit. It's not the neighbor, it's not the zip code, it's not the city, it's the plot, it's exactly the house. And with that, imagine this is, for example, in Basque Country, this is the risk of flooded by rivers, no? That you can see at the level of detail of you wish. You can go as deep as you want. This is seismic for that portfolio, or another portfolio, 2020 units. You can see exactly where the seismic risk is located, or the river flood risk are located. This is, for example, the fire risk sorted by regional, by province, sorry. But again, as mentioned before, you can go as a small unit as you wish in the platform. In total, in Spain, there are more than 46 of total, 43 of total cadastral references. 26 are real estate and housing, but there are much more, another 18 millions in different type of properties, like industrial, commercial, office building, retail, etc. So this platform can be used also for this purpose. We can also provide a physical risk for any type of construction or typology, not just housing. Basically, this is a very final summary of what we did. We compared the portfolio of the lender with the total real estate market exposure of the financial institution. And we also compare that total portfolio with the environment and with the context of where the portfolio is located. What we haven't entered yet is in the quantification of the effect due to the exposure. I don't think that yet is in the expectations of the ECB to start in the quantification. I think the ECB is at least telling the lenders, you need to know where you have your hands on. You need to know where your risk is. You need to know what's the total emission of the portfolio you are financed. You need to have commercial policies that improve the quality of the portfolio you are financed. And this is a starting point. We are not saying this is the end point. We believe this is the starting point. And the applications of the information, of course, for we are applying for active historical portfolio analysis. But why not using this element in a proactive way? Why don't every time you have a lead for a new mortgage, you can get all this information in real time and online, basically immediately through an API exchange information, and you can get the EPC real or a model. You can get the physical risk, and then you can discuss if you are going to finance or not. You can apply that for new guarantees. You can do that for securitization or for demonstrate to your investors that you know the portfolio that you are financing. No? We believe, and with that, I leave for Q&A and accomplish the half an hour, even few minutes less. I think, Richard, that the good news here is there are a number of lessons learned here. First, all the financial institutions together have gone with one unique system. This is a big win for all of them. In this case, was Sociedad Tasacion. In another case, will be another company. But this is a good example that in front of ECB, in front of Bank of Spain, I mean, if all they make a mistake, is Sociedad Tasacion who takes the responsibility. We are the guilty element. If we made a mistake, we are responsible in front of all of them. But in front of Europe, in front of the ECB, the way that they are measuring is absolutely homogeneous. No? And I really want to stress is that. No? The second takeaway is that this is a starting point. This is we are humble on this. No? We are very proud of what we did, thanks to the inspiration of Luca and that miracle event in Madrid 3 years ago that put us in the path to improve. But again, Luca and Richard, I believe that the impact of what you do is you can measure with this example. No? 3 years ago, you came to Madrid to talk about it, and now we are talking about the principle of a reality that can help lenders to have a better financial portfolio, discriminate better their investments, and being able to prove in front of the society, in front of the investors, in front of the regulators, that they know what they are doing. And we are really, really happy to be part of it.
Thank you, Juan. It's obviously a fantastic model, fantastic project that you produced there. And my completely unfair question, but I know a lot of people are thinking about it, is, can this apply in my country? Can you take your model? How easy would it be to cross a border, let's say go to Italy, and use the same logic for the Italian bank?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the key is we haven't explored the rest of the countries, and we are absolutely humble again with that task. But we are more than happy to share the details. We are sharing all the databases on the model with the Bank of Spain. We also offer to the Ministry of Transition, Technology and Environmental why to reinvent the wheel. If we already did the databases, and all the technology that we have developed is absolutely open to discuss with any country interested in that, and see how we can help them in getting this information to the Italian market, or to the German market, or to the France market, or whatever market. No? The opportunities of segmentation, I think, are unlimited. We incorporated GRO construction, for example. It's very, very interesting to see the chart of EPCs by GRO construction, and you can see that 95% of the total EPCs issued since 2015 in Spain are A or B. So the information, as you go deeper and deeper in the quality, imagine how much can you learn with analysis of 26 million of EPCs. No? The answer is yes, Richard. We will be more than happy to partner with whoever wants to do it and replicate. And for your information, the auditor that has looked at the model has told us last week that the audit is favorable. Is in favor. They will be in favor of support our model in front of the ECB and the Bank of Spain, no? Which is a very very good news, and that reinforced the message that the technology is there, that the data in most of the cases is there, and we urge everyone to think about and consider to put this information as a decision-making tool.
Well, our friends at Commission are only going to make more and more demands on this data over the next few years, whether it's for risk weighting, whether it's for green asset reporting, whether it's for insurance capital. It's going to become more and more important. So, given that we've recognized the shortage of data in almost every country, this is incredibly helpful. Juan, thank you so much for your presentation today and for the work you're doing.
Thanks to you for the opportunity, and Luca, one more time for inspiring us on this.
Allow me to say thank you, Juan. What you have done is impressive, and I think that the valuation industry is the engine of this initiative. So what you have done in Spain is really amazing, simply amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And as I said at the beginning, back by popular demand, we come to Thibault Roy from DG Energy. Thibault, thanks for coming back so much. There's several unanswered questions last time because we simply ran out of time. And I think what I've tried to do is I've tried to group them a little bit into some broad topics that I'd like to go through now, if that's okay with you. I think the first group of questions that we had concerned, well, frankly, a little bit of confusion. We hear the taxonomy, we hear ZEB, we hear NZEB, and we're not entirely sure how these things map together. Could you explain the interaction between them in a bit more detail, please? I think you're on mute. You're on mute, Thibault. Okay. Sorry, technical problems are the order of the day on this one. We still can't hear you. I think that gesture means I'm going for the backup earphones. Thibault, can you hear us?
Maybe, Richard, while we wait I mean, just to, we are building in different countries ecosystem where actually we try to maximize the consumer demand because I think what is missing here is a real consumer demand, green consumer demand. And I think that the consequence is to have a real valuation method able to capture this. So, I mean, what we have seen in what Juan is doing in Spain is extremely important. So we solicitate a national hub to look from these examples. I think that we see this happening in other markets. I think it's, but I mean, really, we think that there is a direct link between valuation and consumer demand, and it's very important to put the banks in the condition to respond to the compliance needs that we see coming from Paris, from the European Banking Authority, from Frankfurt for the ECB, and the National Bank. But I think Thibault is back, so I stop it here. I think I've done my job. Thank you.
Thibault.
Yes, I guess you can hear me now.
We can hear you now.
Okay.
Great.
I think we all have our little problems, so but let's hope for the next speakers that there won't be any, indeed. And yeah, thanks a lot for proposing to group the questions. I mean, they were extremely relevant. We were indeed running out of time last time, and I have to say also that some of the questions were really like to the point, very, I mean, I'm not even sure I would have been able to answer on the spot. So I was lucky not to have enough time for that. So you want to start maybe with the first set?
Yeah, I think the interaction between ZEB, NZEB, and the taxonomy definitions, because there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of overlap, and several of the questions I think said we don't really understand this.
Sure. I will share my slides. So.
Yep, perfect.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, we can. It's just coming up now. Yep.
Okay. So my colleague Diana will present the taxonomy more in detail in a later session still today. So I will really move straight to the question, which was essentially how, indeed, as you said, Richard, how do the NZEBs, the ZEBs, and the taxonomy fit together? If a building is compliant with an NZEB definition, would it be also compliant under the taxonomy if it also fits under the ZEB one? And to start with, on the taxonomy, very quickly, in the delegated act that we adopted last year in July, in the subsection 7.1 of the annex, there is this dedicated wording on new buildings and their financing, which is really about the technical screening criteria for determining whether an economic activity qualifies as contributing substantially to climate change mitigation. So you can see the definition on the slides. And so for new buildings, this means that the performance of the building resulting from the construction is at least 10% lower than the threshold set for the NZEB requirement in the EPBD directive. There is also a similar criterion under section 7.7 of the same delegated act, which is about acquisition and ownership of buildings. Now, in the current EPBD, the definition of NZEBs is, in essence, a building with a very high energy performance and where the very low amount of energy should be covered to a very significant extent by energy from renewable sources. Now, the way you should understand the definition, just to be 100% clear, is that the building should perform 10% better than the highest end of the national NZEB range. Meaning, for example, that if in one country the NZEB upper threshold is 50 kilowatt hours per square meter per year, then the building constructed, acquired, owned, or financed should have an energy performance of maximum 45, 50 minus 10%, 45 kilowatt hour per square meter per year. In the meantime, in the EPBD proposal, we suggest a definition of what a zero emission building is. And this is a building with a very high energy performance, again, but as determined in accordance with Annex 1 of the EPBD proposal. And really a point of difference where the very low amount of energy still required is fully covered by energy from renewable sources on site, from a renewable energy community, or from a district heating and cooling system. Now, obviously, the energy performance, as you know from the annexes, is set according to 4 climatic zones with different ceilings, and also different ceilings according to the nature of the building, residential mainly, or offices buildings. Now, based on those definitions, I believe that we can have 2 different kinds of situations. The first situation is if we find ourselves after 1st January 2030 or after 1st January 2027 for public authorities buildings. There, I mean, what I can say is that there would normally be no conflict between the 2 definitions, since the ZEB buildings criteria would be compulsory for all buildings. So there wouldn't be a conflict with potential NZEB criteria because, well, from these dates, all buildings which are built would have to be ZEBs. However, what is true is that the Taxonomy Delegated Act will have to be updated to refer to the ZEBs and not to the NZEBs anymore. Now, in the situation before 1st January 2030 and 2027 for public authorities buildings, you can find 2 different kinds of situations. The first is where the NZEB energy consumption ceiling is below the national ZEB ceiling minus 10%. Now, based on the current Delegated Act, both ZEBs and NZEBs buildings minus 10% will be taxonomy compliant, including for NZEB buildings which do not fulfill the other, let's say, ZEB only criteria, meaning the 0 operational on-site emissions, on-site renewable coverage, and also disclosure of the life cycle greenhouse gases global warming potential. The second situation is where the ZEB ceiling in the member states is actually above the national NZEB minus 10% ceiling. This could also happen indeed. In this situation, obviously, the NZEB minus 10% buildings would still be taxonomy compliant, as laid down in the Delegated Act. And for ZEB buildings, we have to ensure as Commission that they will also be taxonomy compliant. The reason being, I mean, 2 main reasons. First, that in the ZEB definition, the goal is not only to have high ambition on the energy consumption level, but to have a more holistic perspective as to, well, renewables coverage, calculation of global warming potential, and etc. So the 2 would have to be taxonomy compliant. The second reason is that if we were not to do that, we would find discrepancies in the treatment that we do according to the member states, depending on the level of ambition of the member states as regards the NZEB ceiling. So again, for this reason, we would have to amend the Taxonomy Delegated Act.
In fairness, you can see that it is quite complicated, and I can understand now why we had so many of those questions. I can almost hear people writing all these things that you're saying down. It's extremely helpful to have those definitions. Thank you. Now, I assume you just saw Juan's presentation about energy performance mapping and energy performance certificates. We had quite a lot of questions about EPCs, and I think given the lack of data available, first of all, let's start off with what your thoughts are about these kind of measures, like Juan's, to try to fill that data hole, and your thoughts on the acceptability and what the right thresholds, the right numbers that you have to achieve are to fill these data gaps.
Mm-hmm. Well, allow me first maybe to again like present quickly the current background on EPCs and where we want to go. And I think this way I will also be able to better answer the question.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what I can say is that the current system already allows for some degree of comparability as it sets a uniform legislation requiring that EPCs are available in all member states. And secondly, already now the process to calculate the energy performance of buildings is based on the same principles supported by ISO standards. Now, they are shortfalls with the current EPBD, and that's why in the proposal we have, I would say, three main goals. The first is to increase quality and comparability of EPCs. If I take an example on the link, for example, between calculated and metered energy use, member states have the choice to rely on one or the other to set the energy performance, to calculate the energy performance of a building. But we all know that calculated energy use is dependent on the inputs that you provide and on the installation and the interaction between those system elements. Whereas if we take the actual as currently defined or the metered energy use, it may not necessarily reflect the building's intrinsic qualities, but it may be the result of a specific user behavior or of the number of people in the household. So ideally, we would combine metered and calculated energy performance to have the closest possible energy performance to what you would consider typical energy consumption in typical buildings. And that's what we do with the proposal Annex 1, that we lay down how those two ways of reaching an energy performance of a certain building would interact. Now, a second example is that, as you know, by the end of 2025, the EPC will have to comply with Annex 5 of the proposal. We include more compulsory and optional indicators. And that's also a way to ensure more comparability, for example, on operational greenhouse gas emissions, or the comparison of the building's performance with the MEPS level, minimum energy performance standards, or with the ZEB level. And also what we do in the proposal is propose a rescaling of the EPCs with a dual goal of having a common vision for zero emission buildings by 2050, while also obviously taking into account the national differences. And for this reason, the EPC class A will be, the zero energy, zero emission building standard with common criteria with the 4 climatic zones, but with adapted ceilings according precisely to those zones. While for the lowest EPC, so class G, this will include the 15 worst performing buildings in the national member states, even if those 15% obviously are different according to the member states. Now, a second objective that we have with the proposal is, as you mentioned, a reach out to increase the coverage of EPCs. That's also the reason why we make them compulsory for more building categories and more trigger points. So not only the sale or the construction or the renting out, but also whenever a building undergoes a major renovation, or where the rental contract is renewed also for the same tenant, or also for buildings which are owned by public bodies even, for example, if those buildings are not frequently visited by the public. And a second proposal that we have to increase the coverage is to make those EPCs valid for only 5 years for the building classes D to G, so lowest performing ones. Finally, we also want to increase access, obviously, to the building data and to the EPCs. I mean, I have mentioned the elements in the previous EMI Bauhaus event. So very quickly on that, you can refer to Article 14 on data exchange, Article 19 on the new database. And what I can say also is that in those situations which are not yet covered by those articles, where there is a need for more reflection, I would refer you to the excellent presentation by Vasco in the last EMI Bauhaus event on the privacy considerations. And the bottom line on that is that if the data is labeled as personal data or could be personal data, there is a need for a balancing act between, on the one side, the need to have the data to ensure the performance of the mortgage loan agreement or to comply with a legal obligation, and on the other side, obviously, the privacy rights of the concerned party. Now, specifically on the question of, let's say, artificial intelligence or use of algorithms to ensure more information on buildings performance. I believe I can lay down two different specific situations. The first is really where what we really want is to have an energy performance which is calculated based on really typical conditions in the region or depending on the type of building. And for that, where AI can be very useful is that if as a bank or as a public authority, you lack information because there was no EPC in the past, for example, or when you rely on the cadastral information, again, this is too poor to derive anything outright, then you can use AI to, based on machine learning, to really try to derive patterns linked to the type of building in the region, whether it's a 2 facades, whether it's a 4 facades, year of construction, etc. And that can help you really in approximating the energy performance of the building. Another example of useful, where you can usefully rely on artificial intelligence and approximations is if you take, for example, the updates to the EPCs. So what we are asking member states in the proposal, if you look at Article 16, is to have simplified procedures for updating an EPC when only individual elements of the building are upgraded, or when the measures identified in the renovation passport are implemented. And there again, based on those algorithms, you are better capable, for example, if a window or windows are replaced in the building, to update the EPC right to the exact typical energy consumption. Again, based on the way the building is orientated, number of facades, year of construction, etc. Thanks to cross-checking, also cross-checks with other situations that are identified by the algorithm. Now, there is also an important element, obviously, as mentioned by Juan in the previous presentation, which is about the risk of default and the value of the collateral. And then again, obviously based on those models, such as just described in the previous presentation, we believe that the degree of risk attached to the mortgage can be better assessed. But what I can say on this specific point is that at the Commission level, we are still trying to develop our understanding of those interactions. And there I would refer you, for example, to the work of the EFIG, Energy Efficiency Financial Institution Groups.
Thank you, Thibault. Before we leave the topic of energy performance certificates, we've had a very relevant question, a great question actually from the audience. So EPCs which are based on metered energy use, can you actually use those for determining taxonomy eligibility?
I would prefer not to give an answer which would be wrong there.
Okay.
I believe that the answer is that, I mean, if the energy consumption is based on the method which is laid down in the EPBD, then, I mean, if the taxonomy criteria are complied with, then yes. Well, currently in the EPBD, the metered energy can be used, but it should also be cross-checked with standard calculated energy components. So the answer, I believe, would be yes, but I'd be very cautious to have a direct answer on that. I believe it really depends on how the member states transposed the current EPBD.
Okay, understood.
Richard, Luca here. Just one question for Thibault. First of all, Thibault, thank you very much for having giving us the opportunity to have you twice in the last months. Most of our members are asking us, what is the timeline of EPBD? As we know now is in the hands of the Parliament and the Council. What will be your expectation in terms of timeline and next steps? I mean, I don't know if you can help us in getting a good understanding if there is an acceleration of the process, or if now things are a bit more complicated and will be longer. So I have difficulty to give an answer to my members on this. So maybe you can share your views.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you know, the proposal was adopted in December. Now on the council side, the discussions are ongoing in what we call energy working parties, which are reunions of energy attaches at the council, starting from the impact assessment and then going through all the articles. And we are in the process under the French presidency. Now, I cannot answer as to what will be achieved exactly under the French presidency, so meaning by the end of June, but I can say that there is a serious considerations and willingness to really move on the topic, all the more in the current energy prices situation. As you said, everyone realizes that energy efficiency is the best, or one of the best ways to reduce energy dependence as well. Now, on the Parliament side, the rapporteur and shadow rapporteurs have been also designated. And again, discussions are ongoing. This is really on the Parliament side for them to properly analyze the proposal, and we are in contact with them as to when exactly they will have a position that I also cannot say. What I can say is that once the two institutions, Council and Parliament, will have come to a provisional, let's say, common institutional position, obviously they will discuss then together. And I hope that by the end of the year or early next year, 2023, there is, following the ordinary legislative procedure, a common position which is really adopted and voted upon. That doesn't mean that from 2023, the updated directive will apply, because as you know, then we will allow for around 2 years, possibly more, for transposition of the articles in national law. So that means concretely that for really what you can expect the proposal as amended by the two institutions to be applicable in force around 2025.
Thank you. That was exactly. Thank you very much, Thibault, for this clarity. Thanks.
Yet again, we have more questions than we do time. We had several questions from last time. If you can answer it very quickly, can I just ask one more of those, which is the foreseen role of the mortgage portfolio standards? We had that question last time. Is there a simple answer to that?
Simple. There is an answer. There is an answer, and indeed, it's a very valid question again. You have seen the definition, and what I can say on mortgage portfolio standards is that our goal in the Commission is really to reinforce the toolbox that member states can use, and also to have a really a debate on how to go about reaching our high ambitions in terms of energy renovations. And it is the definition in itself and the mention in Article 15 on financing in the proposal are not obligations to set mortgage portfolio standards. It's really laid down as an example of a mechanism that member states can use. And in this regard, we will really benefit a lot from the expertise of the financing community. And what you can also see from the definition very quickly is that we really have tried to keep a lot of flexibility. It is about mechanisms and not a single mechanism, which aim at incentivizing, not requiring mortgage lenders to improve their mortgage stock and the client's trajectories. And also allow me to stress that in our proposed definition, the way we understand the effort that has to be done is not only about the current portfolio or the current stock of clients and mortgages, but also really about a relative improvement, in particular for potential clients. Because we fear that if the definition or another concept or definition were only about the stock of buildings, then the mortgage lenders and also financial actors involved in covered bonds, for example, would only really target the best performing buildings, and they would leave out, and that would be completely counterproductive, those buildings in the EPC class F and G in particular, which precisely have the greatest potential. And so the definition really aims at having those two dimensions. And the key, I think, in the discussions in the next months really be to try to, and next years will be to try to find a good balance between ambitions on the stock and ambitions on the relative improvement of the buildings which are targeted.
Which actually opens up a whole new discussion that we sadly don't have time for. But thank you for coming back today to your second Bauhaus. I suspect we'll be asking you back for a third at some stage soon. Thank you, Thibault.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone.
And I'd like to move on to Navarra, continuing with our Spanish theme. Miguel, Garcia, Eulate, the head of capital markets at Caja de Navarra, recently raised 500 million of green financing for energy efficiency in what, let's face it, is quite a volatile market. And it was the first time that I believe that covered bonds in Spain have been used for this purpose. So, Miguel, can I ask you to talk us through the trade, talk us through your overall approach to this? Miguel, hi.
Yes, Richard, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. We're going to split our presentation between Beatriz, which is head of investor relations for origination, and me. And so I will leave the place to Beatriz, as she will explain to us how the issue itself went, and which was the the attitude from investor side, and then I will follow a bit with a bit more of history of how we have got involved in this journey of financing energy efficiency in buildings. And so if you don't mind, Beatriz will take the lead right now.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me well? Yeah, good. So good afternoon, and thanks Luca and Richard for having us, and let's hope that we don't have any technical hiccups during the presentation. So for the ones in the audience who are not familiar with Caja Rural de Navarra, we are a cooperative, retail and regional financial institution operating in the north of Spain, particularly in the regions of Navarra, Basque Country and Rioja, with total assets over 15 billion and 2.1 billion in outstanding public covered bonds as of today. We are not frequent issuers of covered bonds. We are, however, regular in the market. And as you mentioned, we recently issued a 7-year green covered bond. Information about this transaction is available on our investors' website, and it will be shared on the Bauhaus's website just after the event. I'll try to share my screen. And let me see if you can see it. Yeah, so you have here our investor website and the presentation. Yeah. So this transaction represents our 5th public benchmark covered bond issue in the capital markets, and it is our first issue as well as the first Spanish green covered bond, and it received a AA1 rating by Moody's. Since we established our sustainability bond framework in 2016, we had issued a couple of sustainable covered bonds with green and social use of proceeds, but this time we wanted to issue a pure green covered bond. The reason for this would be that, well, in the past years, we have been evolving with the market and the regulators towards a more sustainable environment. And we have been focusing on our commitment to fund energy efficient buildings. Last year, we were heavily involved with the ECBC and the European Association of Cooperative Banks during the process of drafting the taxonomy. And also last year, in December, we updated our sustainability bond framework, which is in line with the latest green bond principles, the social bond principles, and sustainability bond guidelines. And it aligns the use of proceeds with the EU taxonomy technical screening criteria and the draft of the EU green bond standard. Sustainalytics, in the second party opinion they published on our framework, confirmed its alignment with the ECMA principles and the EU taxonomy. So it was a natural step for us after all this work to evolve from issuing sustainable bonds to green bonds. This inaugural green covered bond was issued under our new framework and the covered bond legislation. The use of proceeds of this bond is exclusively devoted to finance or refinance buildings' energy efficiency, to construct, renovate, and acquire energy efficient buildings, targeting specifically the technical screening criteria for activities 7.1, 7.2, and 7.7 of the taxonomy. The proceeds will be used to invest in the top 15% of Spain's most energy efficient building stock, or in renovated buildings where there has been or will be a 30% improvement in the building's energy efficiency. So this narrow use of proceeds makes sense to us given the nature of the covered bonds' underlying assets. And we were and are proud of the transaction. It was a successful transaction, but then the question would be, how did the market and the investors react to the green features of the transaction and its alignment to the EU taxonomy? So we were glad to see that the green features and the alignment to the taxonomy were very attractive to our potential investors too. And it was on February 7th, when under difficult market conditions, and we were advised by our joint lead managers to announce the transaction to the market. And we were positively surprised to see that the investors' questions during the pre-issue roadshow were primarily focused on its green characteristics, the SFDR considerations and alignment to taxonomy, etc. Many of the conversations we had with the potential investors were about the green aspects of the transaction rather than our credit history or the economic outlook for Spain. On February 9th, once we closed the book, keeping our pricing target of 15 basis points over swap, the final investor universe corresponded to 2/3 of green investors and 1/3 of regular investors probably looking to build their own portfolios to develop Article 8 and Article 9 funds. To give you some additional detail on the splits of the book by geography, Spain got the biggest portion with 45% of allocations, followed by Germany and Austria with 41%. The rest of the investors belong to other jurisdictions like France, Benelux, and Switzerland. So this transaction is not just a capital market transaction for us. It's also an internal and external indication that Caja Rural de Navarra, we are getting involved in improving energy performance and decarbonizing our lending book. Buildings, as you know, represent 40% of the EU CO2 emissions, and banks can lever their capital market stakeholders' expectations into a business strategy with stronger focus on buildings renovations. And I would say as a conclusion, and to give the floor to Miguel, that in our opinion, cover bonds are the natural financing tool for banks' mortgage book, and as such, they can become a key lever for the greening of the European housing stock.
Thank you very much, Beatriz. That's how the issue went. I think you have perfectly explained our expectations and how we met investors' expectations at the same time. Now, what I'm willing to add up to what Beatriz brilliantly explained is more an internal view on this. We, as I always mention, many people in capital markets, we tend to be liability guys, people from the liability side, people issuing bonds, people convincing investors or discussing with rating agencies or whoever. But sustainability issuance obliges profiles such as Beatriz or mine to get involved to the asset side of the bank, to what our activities are. And we shouldn't forget that the EU taxonomy is about activities, and activity comes from the Latin word for action. And that means that is where you change the word, is on your assets. So on the one hand, you can cynically say that green finance does not matter because what matters is activities. That's partially true, but in our humble experience, we would say that it is also a lever for change. Thanks to this pressure coming from investors, from sustainability rating agencies, to our conversations with investment banks, we have been able to convince internally the bank to take steps to change how we face our activities, retail activities, by the way. Being a regional bank, we, as we also say, we don't have a plan B. We cannot close down branches in our regions and open up them in another country because this is our raison d'etre. We are a cooperative bank and we remain rooted in our regions. So when thinking about what can we do to tackle climate change in our regions, buildings come, of course, as a first thought in the sense that they represent, as Beatriz has explained, around 40% of the EU CO2 emissions. And as such, we needed to do something. We were very lucky to have the colleagues we have on the rest of the departments of the bank. This is a choral endeavor. And for example, 4 or 5 years ago already, we got the green light to include 4 new IT fields on our systems. And when I say IT fields, it's not the IT fields of Caja Rural de Navarra, it is the IT systems of all the Caja Rurales in Spain, so that they can join this initiative as we have done. These IT fields may seem as something not so relevant, but it is, believe me, it is not easy to get at. And since 2019, we are tagging each and every new mortgage within the system with the letter and number of energy efficiency and the letter and number for CO2 emissions. I was very glad to hear the presentation by Juan Fernández-Aceytuno from Sociedad Tasacion, because we have joined this initiative. And not just join it, but as we were one of the few banks, if any, which had already real tagging in the loan book. We have compared our real tagging with those coming from the Sociedad Tasacion methodology, And then that has served well for both parties to get more confidence on the quality of the data we were gathering. So we joined this initiative, and I can announce you that we can expect in the coming weeks to have most of our historical loan book or mortgage loan book tagged. We expect to have it something like between 70 and 80% of the loan book completely tagged. The rest will be tackled because there are some collaterals that are not included, and there are some mistakes in the database. But between 70 and 80% of our mortgage book will be tagged, and we will be able to present probably this year with referring to data as of December 2021 on our non-financial reporting this year. 2022, I refer again to the end 2021. We will be probably able to present investors with a breakdown of our whole lending book, which of course we will also include in the HTT project. So things are moving, and we have been, as I said before, very lucky to get our colleagues involved in this. But to finalize my words, is this already done or not? It's not. With this, we are approaching the end of what I call the diagnosis phase. But the diagnosis phase is important in itself. It brings you a good overview of where you are. But now we have to decide, where do we want to go? And then how are we going to take that journey? I think that's the next big step for banks is that we had to finalize the diagnosis phase. That this diagnosis has been hugely helped in buildings by the EU taxonomy. We can discuss many things, but I think it has been helpful. The disclosure regulation, as Beatriz pointed out before, is key for investors because now they have a key element to consider in order to decide whether the bond complies or not. And then I think it's a key demand element. And with all these building blocks, the next step for banks is you get an overview of where you are, but now you have to decide where do you want to go. So we have created already in Caja de Navarra a business unit exclusively devoted to renovations. We are advocating with our regional government in order to become really leaders in housing renovations, mainly in apartment blocks, which is the main construction type in Spain, at least in our regions. And so that's the next step. We have to get commitments to change the building stock. Financing what is already efficient does not change the world again. What we need to do is finance new buildings, which need to be efficient, of course, and then rebuild or retrofit all the buildings. So that's the point at which we are. To sum it up, I would say that getting this wholesale exposure to green cover bonds is helpful, not just to get more investors on your loan book, not just for put a green leaf wherever you show a post-mortem of a transaction. It's not just for that. It's also a way to change how your institution approaches its activities. And then once you get this new feeling, you can or you should go to the next step, which is from diagnosis to commitment. And that's where we are now, and we expect to get new projects in the coming months. And but the direction is clear. That's all from our side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beatriz. Thank you, Miguel, for that. I think that's a very important, that last point I'd like to pick up on first about the linkage between where you are and what you want to do. And I think sometimes we think, we bond people think the bond market's important, but do the people in retail, the people selling the products, the people managing the branch, do they really care? How much communication was there about your trade to the rest of the organization, the people who create those assets?
The good thing is, as we report annually for our sustainable bonds, remember that we, as Beatriz explained, this is our inaugural green bond, but we have been committed to issuing sustainable bonds in the past. So every year we need to disclose our green and social loans. And so there is already a habit in the organization, ingrained in the organization, and habit to report on these issues and to define continuously what is green, what is social. Now we could talk about the social taxonomy, but regarding green, we have been involved, and Luca knows this, very much involved in the discussions around the taxonomy. And I think that this is really understood in the organization, at least the commercial department, the risk department, and those branches more affected by renovations, typically in urban areas, and they are aware of how clients approach Caja de Navarra as a key stakeholder to renovations. Let me put just one issue here. There is one problem for vertical renovations, which is the existence of a community of owners. It's an ownership agreement by which there is no legal personality on those institutions. So you practically lend to someone which does not exist legally. So that's a tricky legal thing. We have been quite active on that and proactive even. There is a positive side, that is that the agreements, now there was a change in the Spanish law, and now agreements have to be taken by simple majority. Before it was like 3/5, 2/3. Now it's simple majority. So once you becoming an expert on housing renovation is not a matter of which is your mortgage and how much is it in terms of price. It is that you need to get involved in horizontal stakeholder conversations with ownership, also these neighborhoods managers, with the regional government, which gives the grant, with the construction sector, and then the bank. And I think this is what our network understands, because they see us doing this kind of operations. And I think this is the kind of expertise that we need to develop further to make this scalable.
Mm. When we last spoke, you made a great analogy, which stuck with me, that the role of banks in this, they shouldn't be pharmacists, they should be doctors. They should be... No.
Yes, I think that we were used to be pharmacists, so that the client came to us knowing what he or she wanted. And now in many areas, not just in housing renovation, we have changed to become doctors, which advises the client. And then the relationship is totally different. I remember the times at which financial advice was not believed to be part of a core business. Of course, it is now. Then who can say that in some years' time, kind of housing advice, being housing the main investment for many clients in Spain and throughout Europe, why shouldn't banks have a certain, I won't say an only or an exclusive role, but a certain role in guiding the journey of clients through house renovations? Why not? I think we are there, and we have to wait, of course, and that we're not so important. Many other actors are, but I think that banks do have a role.
I totally agree, and I think it's a point not made often enough. Beatriz, can I actually pick up on one thing that you said there about your investors? You said that 2/3 of them, if I heard you right, 2/3 of them are green investors, and 1/3 of them are general covered bond investors. Did you actually go through a process of identifying them? And because that's a surprisingly large number, particularly given there haven't been many cedulus issued, Spanish covered bonds issued in the last few years. Did you actually go through a process of trying to say, is this a green investor or is this a non-green investor? And is it really that binary, or some kind of continuum?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are some that it's not that binary, but then yes, we went through the process with mainly one of the joint lead managers who had those investors tagged as green. So it was a clear identification of which investors were the green ones and which ones were the regular ones. Mm. Miguel, I don't know if you want to add something else.
You're on mute, Miguel.
All right, mute.
Sorry, I couldn't take the mute off. Yes, I mean, that's Beatriz has pointed out. It's true that, I mean, from my experience in previous occasions, that has changed. At the beginning, it was the pure pioneers that you visited in the Nordics and the Netherlands and some niche investors. Now, and I think I again repeat this, thanks to the disclosure regulation, many regular investors are, it's not that they are green or not, probably they are not green, dark green in that sense, but they need to get in their hands into green assets because they are building, they are slightly changing their product offer. They are creating Article 8 and Article 9 funds, and so they need these assets in order to feed these funds. So I would say that the main investor base now is how to say it, soft green, in the sense that they are not green anymore. They are not strong green in the sense, or dark green in the sense that they are focused just on green assets, but they are mainstream investors which need to create green vehicles which are demanded by the investor base. And so we saw many of them which in previous transactions were classified as gray or brown or whatever, and now they are classified as green in the sense that they have bought this bond for the green vehicles. So I think there's a big transition in the investment or the real money investors industry, pension funds and investment funds. I think there's a huge transition there into these assets.
I think that thought was underlying my question. You know, I hope one day we don't talk about green and non-green investors. It's just a matter of the disclosure, and then it becomes like credit. It's just a continuum. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you both so much for your presentation today, and congratulations once again on that transaction. It's a fantastic milestone transaction in the market. And for our final presentation today, we're heading back to Brussels. We're heading back to DG Energy. In so many of the conversations, in every single conversation we have, at some stage we mention the taxonomy. The taxonomy is in place. It has had a lot of talk about it, but not too much perhaps going into the details. And in particular, perhaps the technical screening criteria, for example, the really important stuff about how it's applied. I'm very pleased to welcome Diana Barglazan, from DG Energy, who I think is a presentation where is going to go through this in a little bit more detail, and perhaps maybe hinting about what next for the taxonomy. Diana, please.
Thank you very much, Richard, and it's a pleasure for me to be here with you this afternoon. And it's always a pleasure to see all the progress that is made. Also now the previous presentation, I think it shows how fast and how far things go, and it's really good to see this from Commission side. And of course, we do hope that the taxonomy is a useful instrument as it was designed to be. And well, it's a complex instrument. Of course, it's something that we try to put together, and it certainly is not perfect from the very beginning, but we do think in the Commission that it's a very good start, and it provides a very good basis on which we can further improve things. I will try to start the presentation and to see if it worked during the test. It should be working now as well. I hope it's visible.
It is. Thank you.
Perfect. So indeed, the focus will be on the technical screening criteria. I thought this is in particular an audience that is quite familiar by now with the taxonomy. Still, there will be a few things that I would like to recall in the beginning. And then we'll see also with the direction in which we go with the taxonomy. So first of all, about the taxonomy, I think it's always important when we discuss about the taxonomy to keep in mind what it is and what it is not. Sometimes in our discussions with various external partners, we realize that it's very easy to get into a confusion. So the main objective for the taxonomy was to create a classification system, to create basically a list of environmentally sustainable economic activities. That means the taxonomy is focused on the activity, not on the undertaking, the company, and not on the asset, which can create a bit of, well, let's say, I would not say problems or obstacles, but it can create some small difficulties when we talk about financial products or when we talk about sectors like the one related to buildings, where almost necessarily certain products, certain financial products are linked to the asset itself, and then translating criteria for an economic activity to make it linked to the asset is not always very straightforward and easy. The taxonomy aims to provide information to companies, to investors, so they can make informed decisions. It reflects technological and policy developments up to date. But of course, as this progress, also the taxonomy will need to be updated regularly. We try to keep the criteria technology neutral to the extent possible. And the focus is not only to what is currently the greenest of the green, but really on criteria that can help facilitate the transition of all the sectors. And to give an example, the first delegated act covering climate change mitigation has looked at activities and sectors that cover a very large part of the greenhouse gas emissions which exist in our economy. What the taxonomy is not, well, it's not a mandatory list to invest in. There is no obligation to invest in any activities that are aligned with the taxonomy. And it's also not a rating of how green a company or an asset is. It provides information on what is considered environmentally sustainable activity, but it does not really allow to draw conclusions about what is not included in the taxonomy, because if an activity is not included in the taxonomy, it does not necessarily mean it's unsustainable. It can be that the assessment has not been done yet, or the activity was not on a priority list, or maybe its impact on the environment is neutral or might even be positive, but not to such an extent as to consider it as making a substantial contribution to that objective. So the taxonomy does not make any judgment on the financial performance of an investment either. It looks only at its environmental performance and only for the activities which have been assessed and included in the taxonomy so far. Having said this, let's move forward. And how do we define an environmentally sustainable activity? It's based on the taxonomy regulation, and there are several conditions which must be met in order to qualify an economic activity as environmentally sustainable. Such an activity must contribute substantially to at least one of the 6 environmental objectives which have been defined, and you see them on the right side of the slide. So climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, those are the 2 climate objectives, and there are 4 other environmental objectives linked to water and marine resources, protection of these resources, transition to a circular economy, pollution prevention and control, and finally protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. So an environmentally sustainable activity, it's an activity that substantially contributes to at least one of these objectives. At the same time, this activity must do no significant harm to any other environmental objective. So it's not sufficient that an activity contributes to a very large extent to one of the objectives. If it causes substantial, significant harm to another environmental objective, it cannot be included in the taxonomy. In addition, the activities must comply with minimum safeguards in terms of human rights and social standards. And the 4th condition, let's say, is that the activity must comply with the technical screening criteria. Now, this 4th condition actually is only making the 2 first conditions more explicit. The technical screening criteria are defined in delegated acts, and they basically explain under which circumstances an activity can be considered to contribute substantially to one of the objectives, and which are the criteria which should be respected in order to ensure there is no significant harm to any of the objectives. So that means that based on the taxonomy regulation, the Commission is adopting delegated acts. These delegated acts are then subject to the scrutiny of the Council and of the European Parliament. And if there is no objections to them, they start to be implemented. Where we are now, we have one delegated act adopted last year in June. It was agreed in April by the Commission, but the formal adoption was only in June. This is the Climate Delegated Act, and it covers the first two objectives. There is a complementary delegated act, still focused on climate objectives, covering certain activities which were not included in the first delegated act. More sensitive topics like natural gas, nuclear energy, for which there was a specific process in place. So for this one, the proposal was very recently actually formally adopted by the Commission, and now it's under the scrutiny of the co-legislators. However, if we refer to buildings, buildings are covered in the first delegated act. There are no activities related to buildings in the complementary delegated act. And then what we are working on now is also the second delegated act, which will cover the 4 remaining environmental objectives. And building-related activities are also considered in this context. There is another delegated act on Article 8, basically on disclosure requirements, trying to explain exactly how the criteria can be applied and what exactly should be disclosed by various companies, knowing that the taxonomy creates one main obligation, and that is to disclose information on activities that are eligible and align with the taxonomy. So the first Climate Delegated Act covered 7 different sectors and a wide range of activities. It covered energy, transport, forestry, water and water waste and sewage, buildings, ICT and manufacturing. Basically, it covered activities that are responsible, activities in sectors that are responsible for more than 80% of direct greenhouse gas emissions in the EU. And based on an analysis that was conducted for the Platform on Sustainable Finance, it covered about 40% of the EU listed company activities in terms of what activities are eligible under the taxonomy, not necessarily aligned. So now coming to the buildings and the specific technical screening criteria for buildings, I must say that here the presentation is focused on the topic that we are also seeing more interest in, and that is the criteria for activities which are contributing substantially to climate change mitigation. There is another annex with other criteria for the activities that contribute to climate change adaptation. Those are not included in this presentation, just to clarify this. So the first criteria that I will mention are those that ensure the activities contribute substantially to climate change mitigation. On top of that, all these activities must comply also with the do no significant harm criteria. For the construction of new buildings, the first criterion is that the primary energy demand is at least 10% lower than the threshold for the nearly zero energy buildings, based on the national requirements. And the energy performance is certified using an as-built energy performance certificate. So basically certificates which look only in the design phase, trying to estimate the energy performance of a building are not accepted. This is the main condition in terms of climate change mitigation and substantial contribution to it. For large buildings, however, there are 2 additional criteria. One is related to testing for airtightness and thermal integrity. Any deviation or defect has to be disclosed. Another alternative would be to have robust and traceable quality control processes in place during the construction process. And then there is another disclosure obligation. Basically, the life cycle global warming potential of the building must be calculated for each stage of the life cycle and should be disclosed to investors and clients on demand. Another activity covered by the taxonomy for buildings is renovation of existing buildings. Here, the substantial contribution is considered achieved if we have a major renovation, basically a renovation that complies with the applicable requirements for major renovations, or if the renovation leads to a reduction of the primary energy demand of at least 30%. Then we have quite a range of activities which could be grouped, let's say, as individual renovation measures and professional services for energy efficiency. Here I have not really mentioned all the criteria because they are many and quite technical. They are linked usually to minimum energy performance requirements and product legislation. But I tried to at least include all the elements that are being considered. So we have one activity that groups together installation, maintenance, and repair of energy efficiency equipment, looking at insulation, windows, external doors, light sources, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, water heating systems, and water fittings for kitchen and sanitary. Another category, or an activity that groups another category, is installation, maintenance, and repair of charging stations for electric vehicles in buildings and parkings attached to buildings. Here we do not really have specific criteria for substantial contribution. This is considered an enabling activity, and this activity as such is considered to already contribute substantially to climate change mitigation. Then we have installation, maintenance, and repair of instruments and devices for measuring, regulation, and controlling energy performance of buildings, where we look at various thermostats, sensing equipment, building automation and control systems, smart meters, facade and roofing elements with solar shading or solar control function. And another category of individual renovation measures looks at the use of renewable energy technologies related to buildings. And here we have solar PVs, solar hot water panels, heat pumps, wind turbines, thermal or electric energy storage, high efficiency micro CHP, heat exchangers, recovery systems. There is another activity which is not in section 7, which is about construction and real estate. It's included at services in section 9, and this relates to professional services related to energy performance of buildings. So here we have all kinds of technical consultations linked to the improvement of energy performance of buildings, energy audits, building performance assessments, energy management systems, energy performance contracts, energy services provided by ESCOs. And this is also good to keep in mind because it's one set of activities that might not get the right visibility, or it's not obviously related to section 7. So if someone looks in the taxonomy only by section, might miss this part. And then we have, of course, acquisition and ownership of buildings. And this category or this activity was considered to be the closest one related to assets. So basically, when we look at green bonds or other financial instruments where, or even mortgages, where you have a direct link to an asset, to a building, this is basically the category that was considered to be the most relevant that can provide criteria for the respective buildings. For the buildings which are constructed after 1st January 2021, the same criteria apply as for new buildings. For the buildings constructed before, the requirement is to have at least, or for the building to have an EPC class A, at least, or as an alternative, to prove that the building is within the top 15% of the national or regional building stock, expressed based on operational primary energy demand. demonstrated by adequate evidence. So it can be a study, it can be something else. We do not expect a study to be done for each and every single building. We expect that such studies will be done by larger entities first and could be used afterwards by various other companies. There is an additional requirement for large non-residential buildings linked to the way the building is operated, requiring that the building is efficiently operated through energy performance monitoring and assessment. This applies for buildings with an effective rated output over 290 kilowatts. If we look at the no significant harm criteria, and this I think is an area that is not so much discussed, but should not be ignored. There are many criteria. Basically, if we look at one environmental objectives, we have still 5 other objectives for which we need to consider the risk of a significant harm. So for climate change adaptation, this is an area where do no significant harm criteria are defined for all the buildings activities that I mentioned before. The requirement is to identify physical climate risks through an assessment and to implement adaptation solutions to reduce the most important identified physical climate risks. That is a very general requirement, not only for buildings, but across the taxonomy for almost all the activities that were included for climate change mitigation. For water, we have specific criteria which apply only for the construction of new buildings and for renovation of buildings. And basically where they are installed as part of the construction or as part of the renovation, and except for residential buildings, there are certain requirements in terms of the water use for water appliances. For residential buildings, as I mentioned, there is an exception, there is not this requirement. Then for circular economy, the criteria look in particular at the activity as such. And here you can see a very clear distinction. It's not linked to the outcome, the building that results, renovated or constructed, but really to the construction activity or the renovation works that are done. The criteria refer to the obligation to have at least 70% by weight of non-hazardous construction and demolition waste prepared for reuse, recycling, or other material recovery. There is a requirement to operators to limit waste generation. And there is another requirement for building designs and construction techniques to support circularity. Then for pollution, there is a long list of requirements, but basically most of them, if not all, are legal obligations in EU, which derive from various EU legislation acts. So the pollution, sorry, I have not mentioned, I think for the circular economy, also the criteria for the no significant harm apply only for construction of new buildings and renovation of buildings. For pollution, the criteria apply for construction of new building, renovation of new building, but also for the category of individual measures related to energy efficiency equipment. Here, basically, there are requirements for various substances which are maybe included in the materials, in the components that are used. There are also specific criteria for construction of new buildings linked to the location, if it's located on a potentially contaminated site, to make sure that the site has been subject to an investigation for potential contaminants. There are measures for activities linked to construction of new buildings and renovation, where the works are done to have in place measures to reduce the noise, dust, and pollutant emissions. And for individual measures, in the case of energy efficiency equipment, in case of addition of thermal insulation, to do a survey concerning asbestos. For biodiversity, the do no significant harm criteria are defined only for construction of new buildings, requiring an environmental impact assessment or screening and mitigation measures and compensation measures to be implemented. if recommended in this environmental impact assessment. For sites operations that are located in or near biodiversity sensitive areas, appropriate assessment should be conducted and necessary mitigation measures implemented. And the new construction should not be built on arable land or cropland with a moderate to high level of soil fertility and below ground biodiversity, greenfield land or recognized high biodiversity value land matching the definition of forest. Most of these elements are already deriving directly from the EU legislations and are not requirements on top of it. In terms of next steps, and that brings us very close to the end. As I mentioned, we work on the second delegated act. We work with a group of experts. We had the technical expert group that has provided recommendations for the climate delegated act. Now we work with the platform on sustainable finance, and they will finalize the recommendations for the second delegated act by end March. However, there are some activities for which the work is going a bit more slowly than planned. And an additional set of activities could be subject to additional recommendations in May and some even in September. Based on these recommendations, the Commission will adopt a delegated act still this year, as soon as possible. Building activities are likely to be included. There is an interim report from the Platform on Sustainable Finance, which was published in August. So there is already a hint of the direction in which this is going. For buildings, in particular, circular economy and biodiversity objectives are being considered. There is an additional work stream on usability. The Platform on Sustainable Finance has a specific subgroup that is looking at data and usability, and this subgroup will provide recommendations by September 2022. And as mentioned in the beginning, for the taxonomy, there is a general need to make sure that the criteria are updated. Basically, they need to be aligned and to reflect new policies, to be aligned with new scientific evidence, keep a bit in line with the technological progress and available data. One example here is a recommendation that we had from the technical expert group to make sure that we include criteria on carbon metrics or embedded carbon, but these criteria have not been proposed simply because there was no sufficient data at the time. However, in a few years, this can change. On top of that, we are obliged to revise the criteria periodically for the taxonomy, and for some activities which are considered transitional activity, this revision has to happen at least every 3 years. Building renovation is considered a transitional activity. And last but not least, the need to revise the criteria comes also from the need to address usability issues. These criteria have been designed based on scientific advice from experts. However, they are new, and to some extent, only when things start to be implemented, we manage to realize all the possible implications, and some adjustments are likely to be also necessary. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention and look forward to continuing the discussion with you.
Thank you very much, Diana. It seems to be a common theme that we have far too many questions to cover in the time. I would like to ask just one question and risk going slightly over time if I can, because I think it's a really important question and I don't know how easy it is to answer. So if I can paraphrase the question, if I am lending to someone to acquire a building and there are some necessary renovations to come up to taxonomy compliance, is all of my loan considered to be taxonomy compliant, or is it only that bit which is necessary to fund the renovation to come up to that standard?
Yeah,
I don't know if there's a good answer to that. So feel free to pass if it's impossible.
It's a very good question that we were also considering very closely. the criteria are defined for specific activities. So you have different criteria for renovation of buildings and different criteria for acquisition of buildings. If following the renovation, the building, we arrive in a situation where the conditions for acquisition and ownership of buildings are met, then the whole loan can be considered. If, however, we are in a situation that only the criteria linked to building renovation are met, then normally only that part of the loan would qualify. And it's difficult to figure out how to apply this, but beyond this strict, let's say, correspondence between criteria and the activities as such, on one hand, we certainly see the interest of having an incentive effect for loans, and when you have a transaction, is really the right moment to do a building renovation. However, if we take a building that has a very low energy performance, it's class F or G, and let's say 500 kilowatt hour per square meter per year, 30% improvement would still lead us to a level that is very far from what we can consider for a building as being highly efficient.
It is a horribly complicated question to throw at you with 2 minutes to go in our allotted time. So I apologise for that, but thank you. It's an excellent question. So I'm not sure who asked that, but thank you. We had lots of other questions which we simply don't have time for, though I know that a lot of people have this criteria. So thank you so much, Diana. Thank you to all of our presenters today. I think our two presentations from Commission have been incredibly useful, practical explanations of the criteria that we are working under, the rules and the position that we're in. And then our two private sector presentations about how we're responding to that, how we can address the shortfalls of data, and then on the basis of that information, how we can, as Beatriz and Miguel pointed out, how we can then apply that to what we're really trying to do here, which is originate more of the right sorts of assets, change some real behaviours. I do apologise if we've gone over time. I do apologise if we didn't get to your question. Thank you so much for your questions. Anyway, we do appreciate that. And on that, thank you so much for watching. I'm going to hand back now to Luca.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you to all the speakers for being so informative. We want to be a platform of knowledge, and having such a high-level speakers for us was so important to share clarity about a very important piece of legislation, and also to see how the market is taking initiative and has been so proactive in trying to find solution. I want just simply to invite you to take part of the next Bauhaus event, which will take place on the 22nd of April. We have already lined up LBBW, BPM, and KNAUF, and we are, of course, selecting the fourth presentation for the next event. We will get a bit more insight about the green bond world, how the market is taking action to build ESG and green transaction. BPM, they will present us their deal done this week, so we know it will be an important benchmark transaction as well, together with Caja de Navarra. And then KNAUF will give us their views as a material construction on EPBD, what they are doing, and we will follow up the comments on the EPBD, also listening what KNAUF opinion is and what they are doing on their side. With this, I wish you a nice afternoon, and we thank you all for the kind participation. And the Energy Efficiency Mortgage Initiative wants to make the difference. We have 220 million of dwellings to be renovated in the next 8 years. We need to do our part, and we are taking full responsibility of bringing solution on the table. Thank you all. Have a lovely afternoon, and see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.